Okay, we'll start with this. On the undercard of the upcoming Firuza Sharapova versus Sofia Ochagava fight set to go down in Kazan, Russia on April 3rd. I vaguely recall the fight being set to go down at the end of March, but, could be old age.
Could be a brain fart.
The undercard of the April 3rd rematch between Firuza and Sofia, there's going to be a young up-and-coming bantamweight who I've been keeping my eyes on last couple of weeks, last couple of months. An up-and-coming bantamweight that goes by the name of Fatima Dudieva, who's set to be facing an opponent that has yet to be announced in what is an 8-rounder. Fatima sports a professional record of 8 wins and no losses. Orthodox fighter that campaigns in the bantamweight division, that's 118 pounds. That's where the upcoming Ebony Bridges versus Shannon Courtenay fight is set to go down for what is the WBA title, the vacant WBA title. That's where Dina Thorsland is going to be moving down to compete for Daniela Bermudez's old WBO title, which very recently has gone vacant as Daniela has moved up in weight.
This is a division that's been getting a lot of attention as of late.
And it's set to get that much more attention with an up-and-comer and unbeaten fighter like Fatima Dudieva, who comes from both a boxing and mixed martial arts background.
Almost immediately you notice how aggressive she is.
Yeah, many different fighters have many different characteristics. And I would have to say that upon viewing the footage of Fatima in action, she's more ferocity than finesse. So there's some finesse there, some ability to sharpshoot, but Fatima's one of these fighters that's very mean-spirited, very spiteful. Her base style seems to live somewhere between a boxer-puncher and a pressure fighter. She is partial to straight punches and overhand rights.
Wouldn't say she's your textbook close-quarters fighter.
Your textbook mid-range to inside fighter that wants to let off short hooks on the inside, body shots, that kind of stuff. I wouldn't classify Fatima in that category, but she does like to lay it on, and she does like to lay it on thick. That once Fatima smells blood in the water, she's going to go for the gusto, she's going to go for the kill, and that's why her base style lives somewhere between a boxer-puncher and a pressure fighter, because that aggression of hers is a standout quality, and it has to be surmised, it has to be categorized. That whoever's opposite the ring of her is going to have their hands full.
Of course, she's not a safety-first long-distance fighter.
She's not an outside stick and mover, she's not much of a jabber, though she has a jab, but when she's using that jab, she's using it as a key to get within striking distance of her opponent to land power shots.
A jab's more of a setup punch than a deterrent.
I want to say that Fatima shows a lot of promise, though she still is a little bit rough around the edges. I want to say that there is more work needs doing, but this is a fighter that exhibits a lot of promise. I think that as Fatima steps up in class, she's going to have to tidy up the work.
Tighten up the punches.
But she does show promise, and she does show ability. And with aggression being Fatima's standout quality, her willingness to trade, her willingness to engage, win or lose, she makes for an entertaining night of boxing. Almost immediately, I can think of some mouth-watering matchups for Fatima. Maybe Dudieva versus Rachel Ball. Dudieva versus the winner of Bridges versus Courtenay. Dudieva versus Melissa Odessa, my favorite up-and-coming prospect. Anywhere at or around 118 to 122 pounds.
There's world champions like Mexico's own Julie Hangaluna, who holds the WBC.
Argentina's Maria Cecilia Roman, who still holds the IBF. You have to understand 118 pounds was already a pretty deep division, but it's fast being populated with killers. Killers that come from good amateur backgrounds, like Melissa Odessa, like Fatima Dudieva.
Tatiana Zarazevskaya's down there, too.
That being said, 118 pounds is a deep division that's getting deeper by the minute. And we can expect to see Fatima Dudieva in action April 3rd on the undercard of Sharapova versus Ochagava 2. So keep your eyes peeled for
the Amazonka,
who will attempt to, in her next fight, advance to a professional record of 9-0. Let's see what happens. In other news, I don't know if you guys came across this image the last couple of days of Daniel Jacobs and Andre Rozier These two guys parted ways some time ago, rather unamicably, I might add. But it seems that the bond has been rekindled and Andre is going to be once again working Daniel Jacobs' corner. I have no doubts that Daniel's performance against Gabriel Rosado has a lot to do with why he's decided to get Andre back in his corner, because some of Daniel Jacobs' best performances have been under the tutelage of Andre Rozier.
And these two guys go back many, many years.
I'll tell you that it's been a long time since Daniel Jacobs looked the way that he looked against Peter Quillen. It's been a long time since Daniel Jacobs looked the way that he looked against Gennady Golovkin, and I think that's what he's trying to recapture here at this stage of his career. That old fire in the belly that led to some of Daniel's best performances. I mean, for a long time, Daniel was viewed as one of the most formidable middleweights in the world. Gave Peter Quillen his first professional loss, Sergey Derevyanchenko his first professional loss, and he gave Gennady Golovkin one of the hardest fights of Gennady Golovkin's career. I think that's what Daniel is trying to recapture, because it's hard to maintain appearances when you go in a distance with a guy like Gabriel Rosado. Very experienced guy, seasoned veteran, but let's just be honest. Daniel didn't look good in that fight, and some people thought Gabriel Rosado won that fight.
Daniel got the W by the skin of his teeth.
Daniel Jacobs is campaigning as a super middleweight now, a division I think he's more adequately suited to campaign in, given Daniel's physical dimensions. Daniel was always on the taller, more statuesque end of the spectrum as far as middleweights went, so super middleweight these days is a good place for him, but he does have to get it together moving forward. He does have to get it together if he wants to have more legendary nights like the nights he's had in the past, and if I'm being honest, I think he made the right decision. Andre Rozier is a hell of a trainer.
And he looks like that guy from Stargate.
What guy?
The one with the ocean spray logo on his forehead.
I know that guy. So I think this was a prudent decision on Daniel Jacobs' part, and let's hope that moving forward, he doesn't look the way that he looked against Gabriel Rosado in his last outing. Other news per tweet from Michael Benson. Amir Khan had this to say. He says, "Everyone wants to see the Khan-Brook fight. I called Eddie, let's make it happen. Kel's father said, no, we're looking at other options. What's going on with Khan-Brook? How come he doesn't want the fight? Let's make it happen." And, I got mixed feelings about this whole thing, because I've said it before and I'll say it again. If the fight can be put together, if the fight can be staged, then it is worth some considerable value. It would afford the people over there at Matchroom an opportunity to build a card around it, as the main event, in many people's opinion, is past the sell-by date. This is a fight that should have happened years ago, but didn't, for whatever reason, regardless of who you want to blame. Myself, I blame Amir Khan, though that's besides the point. Even here today, this is a fight that if you staged it in the United Kingdom, you could still make some money, because we know that there's no love lost between these two guys. You could build a card around it. I mean, if you got people here in the United States tuning into exhibition matches and novelty acts like Tyson versus Jones Jr. and whatever Mike Tyson's next exhibition match is going to be, then surely a bona fide contest between Amir Khan and Khan-Brook can grab the fight fans' attention over there in the United Kingdom, because they know those two guys hate each other.
That's true.
That even if the fight is past the sell-by date, and it's not worth now what it would have been worth a long time ago, it's still worth something. And you can build a card around it with domestic-level matches
involving local guys and familiar faces.
This fight could still generate considerable revenue. The question is Amir Khan being serious? Is he finally ready to bite the bullet and take on his longtime domestic rival, Khan-Brook? Would say that the timing is rather convenient now that Khan-Brook is coming off that loss to Terrence Crawford in the welterweight division. He hasn't rebounded from that yet.
Timing for this call-out is impeccable, ain't it?
So this call-out is coming at a time when Amir Khan is set to star in his own reality TV show, Meet the Khans, alongside his wife, his family, all that jazz. You wonder that this isn't a hollow call-out intended to draw the boxing community's attention to Amir Khan, as to maybe garner ratings for his reality TV show. Let me tell you something. Amir Khan is a shyster.
He's a flim-flam artist.
Entered into that multi-fight deal with Matchroom over a year ago, well over a year ago, and the feeling was that if he's entering into this multi-fight deal, it's to cap it off with a Khan-Brook showdown, and he ends up capping it off with what? A Terrence Crawford fight? He fights Phil LaGreco, fights Samuel Vargas as part of the deal, and what do you think that ran Eddie Hearn? How many millions did that cost him? Only so that he could cap off the deal, I guess, by fighting Terrence Crawford, then heading out to the Far East, the Middle East, to take on Billy Dibb as part of some obscure promotion. I don't know that I believe that Amir Khan actually wants this fight at a time when he's got to be getting paid something to be on this reality TV show of his. I think that Amir Khan knows that if anyone knows him, they know him for his boxing, so he's revisiting an old subject that might get him some attention as to garner ratings for the television show, because after all these years, I'm really not buying that Amir Khan wants that Brook fight, and I think Brook, his father, they're just sick of it, and they don't care if it happens or if it don't happen.
Amir Khan's a trickster.
He's a con man, and he's very good at what he does, but all the same, that's what he does. Comparatively, Amir Khan has had the better career, fought the bigger names, and made far more money than Brook. But none of that convinces me that Amir Khan actually wants this fight, because he's had several opportunities over the years to make it happen, and it never did. I'd sooner believe this is a publicity stunt than a genuine call-out intended to make a fight happen. And finally, in middleweight/super middleweight news, very recently, Jermall Charlo made an appearance on the Brian Custer podcast, and he talked about all sorts of stuff and all kinds of people. One of the people he talked about was Caleb Plant, who he says doesn't want any smoke with him. He said, Caleb Plant don't want no smoke with me.
Me?
Put that boy back in Tennessee.
Ooh, that rhymed.
In fact, Charlo is so confident in the outcome of that matchup that he has no problem handing Plant the weight advantage on fight night. I'll weigh in at about 162, 163 and beat Caleb Plant's ass. Stop playing with me. He's too small for 168 anyways.
Who's playing with him?
I don't know. You got these guys that latch onto these catchphrases, and they use them at the most inopportune times.
Stop playing with me.
Whatever. If, for whatever reason, a showdown between the pair doesn't take place, Charlo appears ready, willing, and able to take on all comers. I'm down for whatever. I'm here to fight whoever.
No, he's not.
I'll tell you what I think. I think that what Jermall Charlo is attempting to do here by name-dropping Caleb Plant, among several others, is a deflection tactic. A deflection tactic intended to draw attention away from the David Benavidez fight, that fight in particular, that fight specifically, because he doesn't look all that crazy about that fight to me, even though he's the one that got the ball rolling for that thing. He's the one who said he got the green light to move up in weight, and he's the one who mentioned David Benavidez by name. That's how all of this got started. Before that, David Benavidez wasn't looking at this guy.
He wasn't.
And now that mounting pressure is building for Jermall Charlo to follow up on his word, go up there and have that fight, well, he's resorted to name-dropping everyone, and we talked about that here on the channel. He's name-dropping Canelo Alvarez, he's name-dropping Gennady Golovkin, he's name-dropping Demetrius Andrade, and he's name-dropping Caleb Plant.
Everybody.
He's attempting to essentially muddy up the waters, make it a lot more murky than it needs to be, because you know what?
What?
You can't fight all of those guys at the same time anyway, so pick one.
Do it.
Pick the fight that's easiest to make and make the fucking fight.
It'd be a lot easier if Jermall Charlo could make up his mind.
Because depending on who he's talking about, he doesn't know what he wants to do moving forward. He's saying that he's willing to give up some weight, some pounds to Caleb Plant because he's that confident that he would beat him. But this is the same interview where he told Brian Custer that he wants to unify the middleweight division, that he plans on staying there for another 3 fights. So which one is it? Which one is it going to be? Why does he keep talking about fighters that he doesn't plan on fighting in the near future?
He's deflecting.
Tell you something about Caleb Plant. I'll tell you something about that Caleb Plant fight. In spite of Jermall Charlo being so obviously full of shit, and in spite of Caleb Plant being in the running to be Canelo Alvarez's next opponent, provided he beats Billy Joe Saunders, in spite of all of this, there is a possibility that Jermall Charlo could take on Caleb Plant, and here's why. It's pretty obvious to everyone that Jermall Charlo isn't crazy about that David Benavidez fight. From the moment that became a talking point, the story keeps changing for Jermall. Oh, David's not old enough. He needs to get a COVID shot. I'm gonna go up there and fight this guy for what? There's no world title. Yet he created that entire situation. What that communicates to me is that Jermall doesn't want that fight. But at some point in the near future, he's going to have to make a decision. He's going to have to choose, or the choosing will be done for him. Because I told you guys, I'm not convinced Canelo's going to be able to get Caleb Plant in the ring. I think that what the PBC wants to do is lock Canelo in to a multi-fight deal, a multi-fight situation, and that's the only way they'll give him access to Caleb, and I'm not convinced Canelo's going to go for that. I'm not convinced that's going to happen.
When the time comes.
And if the cookie crumbles that way, who does Caleb Plant fight thereafter? Does he fight David Benavidez for no belt at all except his own?
It's not a unification match anymore.
The fight has lost some of its luster. I don't think Caleb views David Benavidez as an attractive opponent option anymore. In that situation, a guy moving up in weight with a big mouth like Jermall Charlo, that might be a little bit more appealing. You know, there's a lot of hyperbole when it comes to Jermall Charlo, there really is, because this is a guy who lost that Matt Korobov fight in the eyes of a lot of people. A lot of people think that Matt Korobov should have got the nod but didn't. And at minimum, what you can say is that in that fight, Jermall didn't look his best, whether he deserved that decision or not. Jermall is a guy who failed to knock out junior middleweight Brandon Adams, who he fought at middleweight. It wasn't until they conjured up little old Dennis Hogan, sent him up there to 160, that Jermall got himself a knockout in recent memory. I mean, even in the Sergey Derevianchenko fight, Sergey, who he landed a lot of clean punches on, he didn't stop that guy. He didn't so much as drop that guy. He definitely beat him, and he beat him decisively, but it's noteworthy that he couldn't even drop Sergey, who was coming off a loss, a very physically taxing fight, and a year of inactivity. This guy's no boogeyman at 160, much less at 168. And maybe from where Caleb is sitting, that's a more attractive opponent option than locking horns with David Benavidez. I mean, at least before David had a belt, the fight makes sense, but now David's not bringing anything to the table. David's bringing about as much to the table as Jermall Charlo would be, with the difference being that Jermall Charlo is not as risky. This guy's no knockout artist in the middleweight division.
Much less at super middleweight.
So let's recap. Let's make it concise. Since I'm not convinced that Caleb Plant is going to take on Canelo Alvarez if Canelo beats Billy, I view the Charlo fight as a possibility because he might look at Charlo as being a safer option than David. You're not fighting Canelo and you're not too crazy about fighting David. Jermall's shooting off at the mouth. You can fight him.
He says he wants to fight you.
I don't know how much truth to that there is, but what I do know is he doesn't seem too crazy about fighting David Benavidez in spite of creating that situation, in spite of painting himself into that corner. He might sooner fight Caleb Plant than willfully take on David Benavidez. These two fighters might seek refuge from everyone else with each other.
It could happen.